to ask questions. And the way to do that is to click on the chat function on the side, and you should have a section under the attendees, the participants, that says raise hand. Stephanie Gomez is moderating the people who have their hands up to ask a question. When your hand is up and it's the appropriate time, she'll call on you and say, if you would please ask your question. And that's how we're going to proceed. As of right now, we're not going to take questions in the chat because there's just a lot of stuff going on here. So with that in mind, we can begin the meeting. I just have some things that I want to say at the top of this. So hey, good afternoon, everybody. First off, I want to say thank you for coming. I'm Mike Brand. I'm the chair of the Coordinators Craft Committee. The purpose of today's event is straightforward. There have been several documents in the last few weeks that outline new strategies in our workplace. What we want to do here today is talk about some of those ideas in the document, identify the problems that they pose, ask questions, and generate a rough idea of best practices. I think everyone needs to be aware of something. Well, there are documents out there. They are not the final plans. They are a rough idea of what we want, but there is a negotiation happening that is going to settle some things. And yeah, so, well, the last 4 months have been certainly difficult on everybody. The next several months provide an opportunity. For one, coordinators and accountants have never had a time that demands unity like right now. Many of the ideas that need implementation require us to work hand in hand. If we need to work offsite, we need the accountants to develop and advocate remote accounting systems. Basically, we need to help each other in a very, very important way. You know, what struck me today was that it's not just about what's going to happen when we get back to work, because not everything's going to be fixed, right? This could come back in the fall. It could come back in the spring. Who knows? We don't have an answer on that, right? We could face another shutdown, and shutdowns could be the reality of our everyday. So that's an important thing to know. So these Zoom meetings can be a little bit difficult. They can, you know, people can talk over each other and everything. What we're hoping to do is try and get this done in about 2 hours, 4 o'clock. What I can say is that not all questions will be answered here, but we don't think this is the end of the conversation. So if anything, it's just a start. We'll provide information about how you can reach out to us in the future and how we can do something more going forward. We have script supervisors here. And I just want to say that, you know, I think some of your concerns will be addressed here, but not all of them will be directly addressed in a comprehensive way. But I think that you can get a lot out of being here and listening to what's going on. Yeah, so, you know, and feel free to ask questions as we go along. All right, so with that in mind, I'm gonna pass it on to one of my colleagues in accounting to talk further.
Hello, my name is Jenny Gates. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. I'm a production accountant, and I'm one of the members of the Accountants Committee with Local 161. Our chair is Ed Gately. He is on the call. He said he will make wave at some point. I just want to say, I know it's been rough. I know it's been a tough 4 months. I hope everybody's been happy and healthy, and their family's been safe and healthy. And I just want to briefly introduce our accounting committee to those who don't know. Ed Gately, our chair, he's also on the executive board. We have Tammy Haynes, who's a payroll accountant in New York and in New Jersey. We have Megan Russell, who's a first assistant accountant and works in Louisiana, Ohio, and Georgia. We have Laura Fioron, our payroll accountant extraordinaire, who used to be in New York and now is in Georgia. And we established our committee back in February after the first general membership meeting. And I want to say thank you for coming, and I look forward to answering your questions and concerns. Back to you, Brant.
So with that in mind, we're going to go over to Vice President Amanda Lynch, who the thing that we're going to talk about next is COVID at large. We're going to talk about the kind of the process of negotiation just a little bit, and what we know about staffing and that kind of thing in terms of who these COVID people are. Amanda?
So I have been not in negotiations for this next part, but me and Dawn and Colleen and Jennifer were all on negotiations for the white paper plan part. And Dawn kind of helped spearhead that and was a great leader. And then she's been getting our proposals in for what is being negotiated now, which Colleen is doing, because this is the first time that the IA, the DGA, SAG-AFTRA, like basically all of the unions are providing a unified front on this to go up against, not up against, but to negotiate with the producers and the studios. So they're just trying to make sure that we're all on the same safety plan kind of thing. And that being said, all of the proposals and the way forward mention this COVID monitor position. What that position is, we don't know, but it's going to have to be someone with power because they have the authority to shut down production. And everything, I talked to Colleen because they're, negotiations are just, they're a slow moving process. And what we know is that there will be a new, basically it's going to be a new position created. So someone's going to have to get, have all the training, and it's going to be a new union position, but within what union, none of those questions have really been answered. I know that there are people that are starting up, like working remotely, and they have these things that are like COVID teams in their manuals, or people, someone has said they have like a 16-person health team, which is great because it's like there's so much that has to logistically happen on a day-to-day with testing, based on the way forward paper. It's like with testing and with getting supplies and making sure everything is staying clean. So it will probably be a COVID monitor with additional people. Who those additional people are, I don't know. If it will be a medic with them, another coordinator, a DGA member. It could be a combination of everything, like its own almost second unit of people that handle those specifics. So it's not necessarily on the original office to oversee that. It has its own office kind of situation, but I don't know. These are all things that are still being hashed out. And that's, as far as COVID goes, that's pretty much what we know is that, we have to figure out how to do this, how to keep everyone safe, especially actors. So I feel like SAG-AFTRA has a bigger stake in all this because their members are the ones that really cannot distance from people. Same with, grip and camera, they're usually right there on each other as well. But they can also wear PPE, whereas actors can't. So that's, pretty much all I know at the moment. So, and I think that's something from this people are going to have to understand is that we're all talking about a new disease that we know a little bit about, but daily it changes. Like, what was it in March? Don't wear a mask. Now we're wearing masks. It's like everything changes as we learn more about the virus. So.
Hey, Amanda, I'm just going to open up some questions
Okay.
that are basic and everything, so I can get the COVID stuff out of the way.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about what the negotiation process is from your understanding of it? Or, even, I know we have Dawn and Jennifer on the call too. If they want to step in, they can be sure to, anybody can
maybe, if Jennifer wants to, my understanding is just that we're all going in to, it's not necessarily, it's kind of its own separate, it's not adding to our being things that are going to be built into our overall contract. It's like its own little separate contract that they're negotiating during this time of COVID. And once COVID goes away or there's a vaccine, then it'll go away, like this negotiation.
I think that's right. I think this is Jennifer. I'm sorry. I've had a little bit of a connection or sound problem, but I think it's okay now. I think your understanding is correct, Amanda. I haven't been in, I mean, I think Colleen's in one right now in the bargaining meetings, but it's really kind of to bargain over sort of temporary procedures that are going to be required to effectuate the safety recommendations for COVID specifically. Yeah.
And that's not just 161 in this. This is everybody, right? We're all in negotiation.
Not even, not even just the IA, like SAG, the Teamsters, the DGA. So I think it's unprecedented. I mean, so because the unions and guilds are really like a unified front, although also it makes it very unwieldy because that's that much bigger group with each, everyone's priority is safety, but obviously that's the reason it's just Colleen in these meetings, because each local was only allowed to send one representative because there were so many other representatives participating. But yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and so like when we say we don't know who the COVID person is going to be yet, that's because that is under negotiation.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a new job, and they're going to have to figure out what I imagine they're going to require some kind of training certification. They're like we've talked about internally, there are things related to it that would make sense for a coordinator to slide into at least part of that role. But it's still, that kind of thing has to be hashed out. I will tell you, like, I don't know what this means in terms of the studios, but I had a UPM who was a former member contact me, just not related to COVID, she was putting some information together for other UPMs about different contracts, and she sort of asked me off the record, this was a number of weeks ago, so it was earlier in the process, what the plan was. And she said, at least with the UPMs she talked to, that all of them felt like this shouldn't be dumped on the production office, this additional work, that they knew it was going to be additional work, and to whatever extent that they had control over it, they agreed that it should be separate. But again, that's they're not, obviously it's the studios that we have to bargain with, not UPMs.
Yep, understood. So
anyway, sorry to do.
And then the other kind of thing that I want to ask about status wise, there has been a conversation about waivers and liability waivers and that kind of thing. Several people emailed us about that question specifically. Do we know anything about that? We're not agreeing to signing waivers.
We're not.
Yeah.
If anyone gets one, if you are in touch with the production, send it to us, contact us. Don't sign it, but send a copy to local 161. Yeah, we're not, that's something that they'd have to bargain over. You shouldn't be pressured into signing something like that in order to work. And they have obligations. I know that there's been they have obligations also because of our collective bargaining rights, because we're unionized, because there's been some stuff in the news, and some of you might be aware, and I've spoken to some people about some state legislation that they're trying to pass to eliminate liability for employers if people, and it's pretty gross legislation because it really like raises a bar that already exists, that making it almost like you have to prove like active, not just the absence of, if an employer doesn't provide like a safe and healthy workplace. This was something that they're trying to pass in Georgia, I believe, and I think in Louisiana. Alex, you had let me know that something like that was passed, and it's like sort of drafted legislation that went out from ALEC that was sent to a bunch of different state legislatures. But so you might also hear about things like that, but the AMPTP and our employers still have to bargain with us because we're unionized. So we have another layer beyond the law to protect us.
Good. I mean, that's a great answer. So I think with that, Amanda, do you want to open up to any COVID related questions at large?
Sure.
Yeah. If anybody has anything, just raise your hand in the chat section.
Yeah, no,
it's a little button. Yeah.
And I was like, I'll try to answer. And if not, I know, well, there's Jennifer, and then Dawn has been on top of everything. So, you know, she might have a better answer. She's really staying on top of this, which is great. So. No questions?
No questions? I mean, it is kind of tricky because right now there's a lot of things that are unknown. So it's kind of like asking a question that we're not going to necessarily have an answer to.
Chris Jackson has a question.
Sorry,
Hi.
who has a question?
Chris Jackson.
Oh,
Hi, this is Chris Jackson, if you can hear me.
Hello.
Hi. Hey, so my question is, I know of a lot of productions that are starting up, and if we get called, are we just to work from home and until? I mean, what are we supposed to tell producers when they call us?
So, I mean, at this point, I feel like, yes, you should try and work from home unless you feel 100% comfortable that you are not in 6 feet or you feel safe in that space. But as of right now, I would work from home and also contact Jennifer or Colleen to discuss everything, because if they're saying there's like things in place, there's not, because it's still being negotiated. So, you know, we just want to make sure that you're not agreeing to something that they're saying, oh yeah, we have all the COVID stuff figured out. No, it's not been figured out. It's not
No.
been figured out. So we just want to make sure that you are safe and you feel comfortable. If you feel comfortable in the office, if it's just you, like, I can be in there, that's fine. I don't think that anyone would tell you that you can't go in, but you know, for the most part, I feel like work from home is obviously at this point the safest place to be. So,
I would also say
Can
that.
I-
Oh,
sorry,
Tom,
go
go
ahead,
ahead. No, go ahead, Tom.
I just want to reiterate what Amanda was saying about reporting your work to the office. Whether you're working from home or not, the minute you get a job offer, report it. There are things that will fall into place once that happens, including Colleen or Jennifer calling production managers, line producers, saying, hey, we understand you're employing our people. We just want to make sure that you know that there are no agreed upon protocols. Some studios are releasing their protocols, and some of them are quite good, and some of them are absolutely ridiculous. So just report your work. I can't stress
Even when
that.
you interview, you can let us know, and you can ask, like, has this production been in touch with Local 161 or with the IA? Have they, you can do it as early as that. Actually, would be great. And if you have concerns about it, you can let us know either at the interview stage or if you accept a job, because then we can deal with the producer about that, or that come up once you've already started that maybe you didn't anticipate but that you realized have become an issue. We did hear, we heard from a script supervisor, and it was on a non-union commercial, but she said on paper they had all of these safety rules and guidelines, but in practice on the set that wasn't really happening. So that's the kind of thing that we also need to keep track of, and that you should also let us know about.
Thank you.
Jesse had a question.
I have a question. This is Betty Chin. How are you?
Hey, Betty.
So maybe Jenny Gates can help me with this answer. How does this affect production insurance costs for liability? Are employees protected now? Is it a new line item cost in the insurance package? Would anyone know? Or even approached this yet.
All right, maybe if you log out and let me log in, I don't know.
My understanding, Betty, is that the studios are currently working on that and trying to figure out what the insurance costs and if there are any kind of indemnity clauses involved and things like that. So we don't have anything solid yet. I've only been speaking with a few studios with regard to this, but my understanding is that they are currently working on this and they're trying to get information. I mean, obviously it's going to be an increased cost that's going to be partially responsible by the production and then probably partially by the studio, depending on the studio.
And independent, do you know?
Again, with the independent, it has something to do with once they figure out what the insurance policies will entail, the bond companies are going to have their say in what their bond requirements will be. And at that point, we'll know. We won't know for a little while because, again, like, you know, most states are not starting back up yet. Like some of the major filming states are not starting back up just yet. And they're trying to work these things out. I mean, with regard to independent, like really small indie, I can't really say. Because if, you know, they don't go through a bond company and they're like doing their own thing, I can't really say. I would say use your discretion and try not to get too involved with those types of productions without speaking with the business agents at 161. But with regard to like the tiers, like the national low budget and the you know, major studios, I know that they're currently working on the insurance policies and what they're going to what they're going to cover, what, you know, also
Right.
with
It's
regard
still in
to paid leave and things like that. Like they're working on it.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem.
Jesse has a question, has her hand raised, or his hand raised. Sorry, Jesse, I don't know. Jesse?
Hey, Jesse Ning.
Jesse?
Well, also Carla
All right.
Habib has a question. So if Carla wants to ask the question now. Jesse or Carla?
Hi, I have a question. So regarding, I read the AMPT white paper and I read the part where it recommends to minimize paper, but it doesn't give any further definition of what that means. Do you know if does anyone know if there's any plan in place to further define the guidelines for minimizing paper, or are they leaving that up to the discretion of each individual production or studio to define their accounting policy regarding minimizing paper?
From what I know is that we're pushing for paperless for the most part, on all fronts, even not just accounting, but definitely as far as like start works, POs, because there's tons of systems in place, and I know accounting is going to get into this further when they're up. And I know for the office, we want to try and definitely go paperless for scripts and call sheets and production reports. I mean, if someone needs to print out the production report, most people, they have a printer, they could print it themselves just to minimize the number of people that are touching it. And, you know, basically you're just trying to minimize contact from somebody else's hands to another person to their face, you know, all those things. So that is in our, you know, one of the things that we definitely want to happen is for this to be mandated that the studios push for paperless and no petty cash and those sort of things. And I see Dawn, do you want to pipe in here?
Yeah, I'm going to stress that none of these decisions have been made, and no matter what decisions are made on a broad scale, there will be negotiations from show to show, just because the nature of our business is so broad and so different in every area, and every show creates its own challenges. But we are truly pushing for as paperless as possible. And I believe the other side is also open to that idea. So we'll see how far we can take it on the broad rulings, but I hope as paperless as humanly possible. Other than paper towels and toilet paper, I'd like to see all the paper go away.
And I would offer, hi, this is Megan from the Accountants Committee. I would offer that we're going to get into some of that as we get into the accountants breakdown, but just to support what these guys were saying, like the premise right now is that we're kind of building the plane as we're flying it. So right now, these are our best ideas about how we're going to be moving forward. And of course, that's going to continue to evolve. Excitingly, there are, you know, through the Accountants Committee, we've got lots of people that have either relationships from past shows or current shows that are happening that are talking to several different studios. And so far, the response from the specific studios that we have connection to has been very positive, and the lead-in has been a lot of like, well, what do you guys recommend? And them coming to us and asking, you know, our advice and expertise. And so that's part of what we're going to offer, you know, as we get into these more detailed breakdowns here in a minute, is what we think a good initial go around would be going back.
Yeah.
So if I understand correctly, we will be seeing some type of documentation of guidelines, but then leaving it to the discretion of the production?
Yeah, basically, yes, there will be a broad definition of what are absolute musts that are agreed upon between the IA, the Teamsters, SAG, DGA, as well as the AMPTP, which is the other side of the table at this point. And those will be released and be expected to be followed by all IA, not just AMPTP shows, but all shows, including the low budgets and the indies. However, of course, there will be individual things that you need to negotiate, because there's a difference between being on a $15 million movie and a, you know, $400,000 movie, and staffing and things like that are going to need to be figured out with those things, you know, on a case-to-case basis. But there will be some sort of broad paper. It will be broader than we all like, but that's the nature of the beast.
Great. And I just have one more follow-up question. Do you know if original receipts is part of this discussion? Because it's my understanding that's a point of contention.
It is part of the discussion. I have no idea where that will go. I'm sorry if I took that over too quickly, because I've been pushing that from the beginning too.
It is, because it's like, either people take, like if they need them specifically for the tax credit, like that's kind of where everybody has to get into it, is like, what is actually needed? Do you have to have the original receipt? Can you take the scans? Because everything gets done so digitally now. So like, I know with the cachet cards, you can scan the receipts and attach them to and then everything is paperless, and it's kind of great. But sometimes people are stuck in their ways and they want, you know, paper, like not necessarily the accountings, but the studio or whatever. I don't know. But I think everything is either pushing for it to be paperless or paperless for a time. And it's like, you do everything digitally. And then if you need the original receipts for the end of the job, then they just like come to you and they sit in a box for 48 hours or whatever the period that we know that it dissolves off of paper. And, you know, then people can.
Well, I can offer just a little bit more of contextual information on where we are with specific to receipts, as far as like digital or not digital, and some of that as you were, I mean, obviously we all have worked for either studios or independents where it's just somebody's preference to have it, and that's how they like it. They like to see all that paper, but obviously the legality of it, like, okay, well, is there a legal requirement for digital receipts? That's a question we're trying to answer on the Accountants Committee is trying to reach out and address that. And then we've also identified that, okay, well, if it's not legality and it's just preference, can we eliminate some of those preferences that might result in paper for us? For example, the tax incentives. So we are talking to and reaching out to individual state film offices so that we can understand. I mean, the research so far, at least the verbiage says, it's sort of like an understood preference, but I haven't seen anything in writing yet from a tax incentive standpoint that says it has to be a physical receipt. It's just traditional and has been easy, I guess, up to this point. But again, the feedback that I've been getting as we've been going through is there a willingness to try and move into a digital space. So pursuing those two separate thoughts, tax incentive, and then, you know, federal and state requirements, of course, will be two different things, but some of it might end up, you know, like I said, I think our processes and that we're going to recommend today might be a little anticipatory of future law that is coming or future precedents that the states are going to allow, because I do think that they're also going to be thinking about these things. But the nature of, you know, the bureaucratic institutions, of course, is that we're going to move much more quickly than they will be able to catch up from a law standpoint. So I hope that addresses some of your thoughts about, but we are doing work on the back end to figure out where we are with those things, and talk to Colleen and Jen about how to pursue, if we need to, from a legal standpoint, you know, and moving into asking the tax incentives or the states to rescind those requirements.
So just to add to Megan, I do know for a fact that New York State, Massachusetts, and California had recently, in their third version of their tax incentive program, said that they do not require paper receipts. So it's, you know, New York State has not required it, and my understanding, Massachusetts also does not require it as well. But we're still working on getting more information from other jurisdictions if they require it, like Georgia, et cetera.
Let's take a couple more questions in this area, and then we can move on to the accounting section.
Michael Leone has a question.
Go ahead, buddy.
What?
Hey, how you doing? This is Mike Leone down in Wilmington. I'm sure I'm getting ahead of myself in all this and everything, but I see as we all comply with all these new regulations and everything during the normal course of a 12-hour shooting day, we're not going to get as much work done. So is a vital part of these discussions the fact that the, you know, schedules need to expand or budgets need to expand? Because, you know, you add 3 minutes to a 30 setup work day. You've just added, you know, 90 minutes to that day doing all this wiping down and cleaning up and distancing and stuff. So are the studios, you know, are they on board to not only absorb the cost of all this added COVID preparation, but the fact that it's just going to take longer to shoot the shows? And I hope it just doesn't, they don't just think that the crews are going to just have to work faster and longer than they normally work. So I just want to bring that up as a part of this whole discussion.
So everything that has been put out is calling for shorter shoot days, not longer shoot days, because one of the things that help your immune system is obviously rest. And as we haven't, obviously, we don't know the answer to that question. Our hope is that, I mean, it would be a separate cleaning team coming in at night, but as far as like the equipment getting wiped down, obviously people want to assign a camera department, you know, someone in the camera department wipes down the camera stuff. So everyone understands that what has to happen, who is absorbing the cost, that they don't know. That hasn't been all hashed out at the moment. Sure. And as far as adding shoot days, I feel like everyone understands that there's going to be more prep time on the front end because you have to prepare, you know, the spaces in a new way that we're not used to. It's like we're used to being crammed into like our tiny little bullpen of an office that everyone walks through. But, you know, we have to figure out distancing and also making sure that the studio or whatever has like the correct ventilation regulations and everything in place for this. And so those are all still very much unknowns that are being negotiated and worked out as of right now. So.
Gotcha. Thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome.
Before we take the next question, I just want to say this real quick is that, you know, for the accountants and coordinators, one of the things that, you know, if we have shorter days, presumably, one of the natural inclinations is that people would work shorter hours and make less money. But nobody should take a lesser rate than what they've had in the past. I mean, I think that that's pretty obvious. But if somebody comes in and says it's going to be a 10-hour day every day going forward, that's not realistic. we don't know that for sure, or at least you can't guarantee that. So we could talk more about that later on. Sorry, Steph, who's next?
Jesse is next.
Yeah, hi, sorry, I had some mic issues. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Hey.
Oh, yay, hooray. So going back to reporting work, I was just wondering, how does that apply to productions that were on a hiatus for the past few months, but are now calling us back in before phase 4 and expecting us to be the people to purchase like PPE and arrange COVID testing before this this COVID monitor is in place?
Do let us know that.
Yeah, get in contact with Jennifer. Because even though because eventually it's like I was in the middle of a show as well, but technically I was laid off. So, it's like you're restarting again, basically. So this is like before COVID, and now we have after COVID or during COVID, I guess. So just think of it as a new job still, but you're just reporting that you're back, because everything's going to change. You would have had to update the work anyway, because obviously the end date is different, and who's to say who's coming back, who feels comfortable coming back, or all of that. So, but definitely contact Jennifer and Colleen.
So if we are uncomfortable coming back, though, wouldn't that disqualify us for unemployment benefits because we technically refused a job?
You're
Jennifer,
muted.
you're on mute.
Sorry. I think I am not, I think it probably is going to depend on the state. Like, we know that some of the states are worse on this interpretation. But like, for example, I happen to ask this question for someone who answers about the New York State system specifically. This was actually something I had heard from him years ago outside of COVID context, that you can basically have a reason, if you get medical documentation that says from your doctor, that they recommend that you not go back to this particular job. As long as it's clear that it's a particular job, that you can do other kinds of work, like you could work if it was remote, but you can't go be in a crowded work situation or whatever, or then you would be continue to be eligible for unemployment, provided that you met the other eligibility requirements. Like, you can not go back to a particular job if it's not safe at this time. You may need medical documentation. But again, I think we're going to have to see about how the state offices interpret it as well, the state departments of labor, because, that has, so far, New York has for people who are, in a specific situation with this person to find out going forward. But as a general rule, he told me this years ago, pre-COVID, that even if you left a job because your doctor recommended that job was not good for your health, even if you didn't tell your employer that was the reason that you were resigning, but as long as you have documentation, and as long as it doesn't say that you can't work, just that they recommend that you not do that particular job for health reasons, that you would be eligible for unemployment. So.
Jesse, if you have something to say about that, that's fine. I just want to say, let's just take 2 more questions in this area and then move on to the accountants. And Dawn, did you have something you want to say?
I do, actually. I do, and it's more a question for Jennifer at this point, is how much does the fact that we've not been cleared to go back to work by our union yet, how much does that protect us when it comes to our unemployment?
That is another question that I can ask. I mean, it's certainly the case that you could say, like, my union is still bargaining about this stuff. They're still bargaining over the rules. And we have heard,
that out, because we don't want people losing their unemployment because they don't want to go sit, 2 feet from 9 other people in their office.
Yeah, and I definitely think that will play a role. Like, we've heard from some of you that you're being called back, but you're going to be working remotely for the, indefinitely for now. Jesse, if they're telling you that they want you to come into the office.
They do,
now?
yeah. They want me physically in within probably a week or two before phase 4.
And what are they telling you? Are they telling you, like,
Basically,
they
I would be responsible for social distancing the office. I would have to hire like 4 PAs to move tables. I have to buy plexiglass barriers, things that I'm not very familiar or comfortable with doing at this stage, but I'm not sure how to respond.
Okay. All right.
I mean,
So let's follow up after this meeting, and I'll also like loop Colleen in, because I think that is a problem. They're telling you to do that. Even in the state requirements in New York, they are, even when they're allowing offices to reopen, they're telling you that everybody shouldn't be a full staff in at once, that you should like stagger schedules and have some people working remotely. So I don't know, that certainly the fact that they're sort of it'll turn somewhat on the specifics, but yeah, let's talk about that. And if that comes up for anyone else, please get in touch with us.
Okay, thanks.
All right, let's take 2 more questions and then move on.
Tara, Tara's next. Asking a question.
Hi, Tara here. I just wanted to go back to the paperless, and it probably segues into the accounting conversation that's next. But for some of the, for some of our members that aren't necessarily working under the direction of a studio, it might be helpful for there to be a resource either connected with the 161 website that can link people to paperless systems, whether it's Cache or paperless start work, or whatever resources that you have that could be shared amongst the union. That's all.
Yeah, we are going to do that, like and I know accounting is going to talk about sharing the resources that they have with the different available options. I know, as far as production goes, a lot of times that is designated through the studio via either, if you're Netflix, it's Prodigal, CBS is DAX. Other people use Synchronize, which I personally think is the best one out there at the moment. But as far as like on board, there's the different start work situations and the different POs and check requests. I think Megan and then we're going to get into that. And I believe we'll be sharing the resources. I think we can put that up on the website as well under, I think there's a resource tab. So, we'll get a list going, and it might be a few days, but we'll definitely get something up there.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to have that. Thank you.
And then Betty, right? Beechin, do you have a question?
Hi, hello, can you hear me? I have a staffing question. Let's say, I don't know if everyone or every production is going to have a COVID monitor, but sometimes it falls on the position of the production office. If someone is tested, and I don't know how regularly we're going to get tested, but I think it's like every day we're supposed to get tested. But if one of our staff members, a crew member, like for instance, a DP is tested positive and he's asked to, take a leave, is there a process of finding replacements? Are we keeping, how are we going to staff it immediately? Does production have to stop immediately, or do we have any policy for this? Or, any of our key department people, is there a plan B for the situation?
Those are all things that are being negotiated at the moment, is what policies are going to be in place, what happens, who is, everything is saying, I don't know if there will be a production without a COVID monitor, because that is key in this because of all the testing and someone else having the responsibility to be like, yes, the DP is sick, so we have to shut down, because you're going to have to go through a cleaning process once that happens. It's, it's just gonna it is gonna slow down production. It's not gonna happen immediately. It's not like when someone gets sick and then you call in a replacement and, you know, you go about your day. That's just not how the nature of this is going to be.
Probably script supervisors will be in the same situation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. So I and like I said, I don't have the ins and outs of that because again, that's all what we're negotiating right now with the DGA and like everyone kind of having the united front to be like, okay, if one of our members is sick, what does this mean? How does this happen? What do we do to get us back to safety to make sure that everyone else feels comfortable coming back to work and moving forward? And yes, like the DP is, you know, usually on a movie, he's an essential element. So sometimes that's an insurance claim if they're sick and you're not going to replace. I don't know if that's going to be something that's going to be handled differently for these types of situations, but that's what these negotiations are for.
Just to put a button on that, you know, the negotiation is going to come up with some kind of thing that's finite, but there is a step that is beyond that, that is what the best practices are that we as coordinators have come to understand is what we should do and should not do. And that's part of the reason why we have a coordinator committee right now, is to establish those kind of things and to make sure that we are all on the same page about that. Because, and this goes back to Jesse's question too, we should not do any of these things that are related to COVID sourcing, right? Especially with testing. We're not medical professionals. We're office middle management-ish. But yeah, I mean, that being said, we have a job that is support, and so we may have a role in that, but it shouldn't be our end all. So, you know, we'll get into that in a little bit more with the coordinators, but as of right now, I'm going to pass it off to the accountants to go over their details, and then we'll do more questions. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, babe.
Okay, so again, my name's Megan. We're gonna, in the next few minutes, just go over some of the behind the scenes work that's been happening for the last many weeks to try to get some of these answers that we knew we would inevitably need. The accountants committee in particular has been working on identifying the different areas of risk that a post-COVID environment will pose to us, and try to first identify those risks so that they can be eliminated. And then if it's impossible to eliminate the risk, then to, you know, mitigate that as much as humanly possible. I think it's important to say here that of all of the people on the accountants committee, we have, as I mentioned earlier, several studios that we're sort of liaising with for one reason or another. So some of these points of reference actually come from meetings and conversations that we've had with HBO, Paramount, Hallmark, Netflix as a start. So this isn't something that's been happening in a little bubble off to the side, like a dream list that we've come up with. It's definitely been more of a, okay, where do we want to start? How do we want to go back to work safely? And that's really been the beginning. How do we want to go back to work safely? And then from there, let's now start the conversation with the studios about how to implement practicality, expense, that kind of thing. So we're going to go through really step by step, line by line, the document that we came up with that identifies those points of risk for accounting specifically, and then the recommendations to eliminate and mitigate that risk. As I think Amanda spoke to a moment ago, we are also currently undergoing all kinds of, you know, training. I think most of us have hopped on these webinars with the new digital platforms that we haven't used before, but the sum total is, as we get those things going, I think it's wonderful to see a common resource that we could put together, you know, and maybe with little reviews about, okay, this platform works well with this, et cetera, et cetera. So I like that as a resource, and we'll start working on that and submit it to the union for posting as soon as that's something that can be done, and we'll continue to evolve that as we learn more and more. So before we get started, I just want to say that this document was created weeks ago in order to give Colleen and Dawn and these guys some frame of reference and context for how maybe the accountants would move forward. None of this is in stone. None of this is something that's been approved in any kind of like larger legal sense, but it has been, I think, something that has informed the conversation. And because nothing has been negotiated fully and agreed upon, we would still like to present you with this information so that you can see where we're at in the arc of this process. I think that the people that I've spoken to just casually outside of the union, it's brought them a feeling of, calm to know that there are these deeper conversations going on, and concern for welfare, and a deep knowledge about what is usually asked of accountants and what could be asked of us moving forward. So just know that none of this is going to be concrete, and that it's going to continue to evolve as laws change and as, of course, these negotiations and agreements get finalized. But we did think it was important to start presenting these things to you now, so that you could know what we were talking about. It's divided up into minor sections. We're going to get into payroll first, then we're going to talk a little bit about accounts payable, and then we're going to talk about staffing and like the remote work aspect of things, and then we'll button it up. Feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions. I'm happy to share the thoughts that went into, getting to this point. And then, of course, we can always answer things more fully offline if necessary. Tammy, are you ready to do payroll? You might be muted.
Yes, it just started raining and I was outside. So just give me 1 minute to come in out of the rain. Sorry.
No problem. It's not a problem. So again, the idea was, let's look at the global, because the job is different depending on the size of the show and if you're independent or studio, and there's lots of different subtle factors and facets that go into making each specific job. So this was kind of the macro pulled back view of what it is that we do with like, okay, here's a global category of risk. Now, what do we do about eliminating that given what we know now, or maybe more appropriately, what we don't know now about the virus. Well, she must be dancing around, so I'll just, oh good, I was gonna go to accounts payable, but you can start.
I'm inside now, I'm safe. Okay, let me just open my notes. So my name's Tammy. I'm a payroll accountant in New York. I started as a clerk in 2011, said I will never be a payroll accountant. And now I've been doing it for 7 years. So over the years, we've all seen some like truly grimy paperwork come in. You see a brown stain, you hope that it's chocolate, put some tape over it, move on. But in the COVID-19 world, that's no longer acceptable. It was never really, but we dealt with it and it was fine. So now we're going digital. We have Tim, Cast and Crew, EP, Media Services, Green Slate. They all have digital start work platforms. They all function basically the same. Pros and cons to all, I'm sure. And I highly recommend taking a, sorry, I was running. Doing the webinars and giving feedback to Cast and Crew, EP, Tim, whoever it is, and telling them what works, what doesn't work, because none of them are perfect. They don't necessarily know what it's like to be a payroll accountant. Some of them do, some don't, I'm sure. But they need our feedback to make the programs work for us, because switching to digital should make things easier. It should not make our jobs harder. It'll definitely make our jobs cleaner. So in addition to digital starts, there's also digital time cards. Cast and Crew and EP has theirs. Tim does not, but Media Services has it, Green Slate, everybody has it. And yeah, I mean, there's not that much to say about it. Take the webinars and learn how to use the different programs, find what works for you. Sometimes you'll be on a job where you do get to make a decision about what software you get to use. And sometimes it comes from the studio and you don't really have a choice, unfortunately. But it's always good to be able to give feedback to the studios about what actually works because they're listening. The studio that I've been talking with, they are listening to the payroll accountants' feedback, and they're listening, and they're taking it under consideration when they're making their decisions about what products they're going to use. Background vouchers should have been digital for, I don't know, past 10, 15 years, finally happening. RABs just got approved for SAG, so you'll be able to do, sorry, I lost my place. Yeah, there's RABs, EMS, Central Casting are rolling out their digital voucher soon. And paychecks is another big risk point. Going to set to hand out paychecks. I never liked doing it. It took me away from my desk for too long. But we don't really need to be handing out checks anymore. You can use direct deposit. They can get their pay stubs online, mycastandcrew.com. EP has a website, I don't remember what it's called, but you can create a profile with EP as well to get your pay stubs. The other options that some studios are talking about is letting crew pick up their paychecks directly from the payroll companies, or have your paycheck mailed out from the payroll company. There's just no reason for us to be going to set and handing out paper anymore. And that's kind of all I have for payroll. If anyone has more specific questions about the software or things like that, I'm open to talking. Yeah, back to Megan or Jenny.
I mean, I think the sum total of everything that she shared was that, you know, all elements, like technology is present to make our job completely remote, right? And obviously, eliminating the risk of contagion or spreading of contagion would be 100% if accountants were not there, right? So I think that's the 100% answer, right? Now, how it actually shakes out in the immediate future and how it begins to shake out as time progresses and we get more information and science catches up with where we are, et cetera, you know, that'll also be something we'll have to pivot around. But the idea is that the technology and platforms do exist for payroll to be 100% digital without complaint. There are conversations going around, obviously, about like, okay, well, does mailing the checkout on Friday count as their pay stub out count as getting paid on Friday, things like that. Those are answers that we don't really have yet, I don't think, unless somebody at the union has discussed that and I haven't caught up yet. But I mean, those are things that we're talking about. Going 100% direct deposit is obviously a solution. And then for those people, I'm not sure where we are with like, okay, the point of contention that I've heard was, well, some people don't prefer direct deposit. Their preference is a paper check somehow. And so, you know, I think that as long as accountants aren't being asked to print paper, show up with paper, send paper through 3 different people to get to them, that it's possible that they could get a physical check mailed to whatever address they have with the payroll company, but they may not want to wait that long and there may not be anybody there to receive it. So those are all still obvious hurdles, I think, to really being able to work out the kinks in the system, but the initial tools are there. And the same is true for like AP across the board. And I'll just briefly run through the kind of like, you know, ideas of risk that we had in that department. I'll just read a little bit, and then you guys can ask any questions you want. So obviously a risk point for AP is people, you know, if we are there, people want to come in and they want to talk to you, right? So obviously directing people to cast and crew, phone and email only. Ideally, we're remote, but if we're not, and that's something that's been taken care of and productions manage the safety there, then nobody's visiting us in the office. And then, you know, AP checks are either going to be electronic, depending on the end decision of software, or they get mailed from there. Petty cash is an obvious point of risk. Money is disgusting. We all know that. It's paper that everyone touches. I don't like to think about it because it's that gross. And even washing your hands after doesn't always, you know, leave me with the sense of like, well, it was on the table and things like that. So really the only way to eliminate risk with petty cash is to eliminate petty cash, right? As an entity where we no longer touch money to give it out, and we don't cut checks that people then go deposit and bring us cash back to cash out at the end. So we're just eliminating that and moving completely over to P-card would be the solution in this regard. All invoicing, per diem, everything that can be moved over to a check would be moved over to a check. AP requests, these are digital platforms that are available. So as Amanda was mentioning, POs, check requests, P-card requests, P-card envelopes, supporting documents. I've specifically been doing a ton of research and training on which platforms are capable of solving which of those forms. And I do have some working solutions in place, and I'm got some more training on a different platform coming up next week. So I'll have even more, and that'll be present on that document that we send over to the union to be uploaded on the website. Obviously, backup is all going to have to be scanned and submitted digitally. They're not going to be able to, you know, just submit the check requests. It still has to be, you know, something that we can check and do our job on. Audit. The entire approval process has to go digital. So that means, of course, we're going to be talking to the crew about the digital aspects of their job, but now UPMs and line producers are going to have the additional learning of how to sign something electronically, how to approve it, either if it's through a specific platform or if it's, you know, generically through like an Adobe Sign situation. Something that I have been talking to these digital platforms about is their scope of support. Meaning my worst case scenario, I feel that people would be coming to the payroll accountant about payroll software issues, or coming to AP about AP software issues. And so one of the things I've been asking PSL Plus and DPO and these different programs is like, are you prepared to support the crew directly if they're having issues with the software? Because obviously 1 or 2 people needing computer help is something that's clearly beyond the scope of our work, but something that's manageable. And now it's going to become an entirely separate job. And every single company I've spoken with so far is prepared to support the crew directly in that. So it would just be a matter of directing the crew to the correct support number in that regard so that they can get the answers they need. P-cards, everybody. Cachet, they're all prepared or preparing for that eventuality, that they're going to be direct tech support for crew, and all we're going to have to do is funnel them that way. AP check signing, obviously, the thought was, well, okay, rush locations checks, things like that happen quickly in a moment. How are we going to handle, you know, doing things last minute? And if we have to entertain the idea of a physical check, how do we do that? And ultimately, obviously, the elimination of the risk would be eliminating the need for a physical check altogether, and going to some sort of EFT or ACH situation where we're actually sending the vendor a PDF of the digital check that is being sent to their bank, much like we would handle a wire. So we would send the proof as like, okay, this has happened, you know, this is coming, even though it takes 24 hours ish for something to hit a bank account sometimes, then that would be the proof that we would be able to supply. On the other hand, if people are interested in physical checks or the smaller shows, or depending on how all these things shake out, the idea that you would have double signers on a check is something that I think that creates part of that issue. So going to single signer checks as a recommendation, since a double signature doesn't really eliminate fraud. I know that some of the larger studios have that sense that it's fraud prevention because it used to be, although like maker toner and things like that, you know, technologies continue to evolve. And I have found that they're amenable to like at least discussing that idea that maker toner is no longer necessary, or a double signer doesn't necessarily do what, you know, what they're hoping for. And in this case, because it would go towards preventing paper being passed through extra people, you could make checks single signer so that either the line producer or the accountant could take care of something in that way. AP check delivery, same thing, you know, referring back to like crew that's getting payments for a kit, or, you know, any kind of reimbursement for any reason. The ideal and the gold standard would be some kind of ACH where we PDF them proof of the ACH and follow up just like we would if it was in the mail. They would call us and let us know if it hadn't gone through, and we could address it at that time. If physical checks are something that they need, then those things would be mailed to the address on file and not necessarily sent to set. I think anytime you introduce the idea that paper has to go to set from the production office or to the production office from set, you're creating a chain of touching of the paper. And I think the science hasn't caught up yet enough to know what kind of risk that takes with the object, or that instills with the object alone. And then also, of course, a PA touching another PA, handing it to someone else, and then the person gets it, that kind of thing. So eliminating it is really what we're moving towards. And I do acknowledge that there's a level of discomfort, a lot of studios specifically, but I've also worked for many independent features, and sometimes the producers do have a level of comfort that they receive from doing things the way that they have always done them. The good news is I have, you know, received different responses than I was expecting. People at Paramount were interested in talking about maybe moving past some of these things that they sort of hold tight to as like the way that it was always done. So I think now's the time to, I don't want to say insist, but to speak clearly about what is the most safe thing for us to be doing. I would encourage you to use the information that we're giving today to like be able to be an advocate for your own safety and the safety of your team. So that way, when it comes time to it, you know what's available to you as far as like how you could take care of the risk on your end. And then you would have a strong sense of, are they asking you to do something that's risky or not? P cards, obviously, we were just talking about the digital receipts. This is my last point for AP that, you know, I already disclosed that we're talking to the different state incentives, et cetera. The feedback so far that we've gotten is pretty good. The idea that, you know, there's going to be a digital system that can handle everything, I've not discovered yet, but in P-card land, obviously Cachet will go a long way. And then I know of a couple of other systems that actually support the digital receipt process. And, you know, obviously you can't lose a receipt if you've already taken a picture of it. There is some question being pushed about, you know, that old trope where they've already submitted this gas receipt. They're trying to double submit for reimbursement, that kind of thing. And I think that, you know, the advent of digital receipts has long since passed. People submit Amazon receipts all the time. They're just printing them out. They could always print them out and submit them again. So our work and our scope really doesn't change. It's auditing, it's checking, you know, it's your brain thinking, okay, did I see that before? Because your brain will do that for you, right? And then obviously within the system and doing general ledgers like you always do, you would see, even if you had accidentally and or unknowingly two different people processed the same receipt, you could always go back and recoup. So I really don't think it's as apocalyptic as some you know, the fear-based reaction to some producers or, you know, studios that they might have against not wanting to be taken advantage of. I don't think the scope is that large in this case. To move to 100% digital receipts doesn't create a lot more risk for them, right? It actually, I think, exposes our value as accountants because we've been doing this for them all along. They just didn't realize how fully until now. raises for everybody. So that being said, AP kind of buttons itself up in that way. Those are the different, I just blew through everything so quickly. I know we're always going to be short on time on these things, and I wanted to disseminate as much of the thought that went into this information as possible, and know that if there's any kind of questions, we can take care of that now, or I can follow up with people individually later. But we can move on to staffing and remote work unless there are any questions.
Yes, Kimmy Johnson has a question.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I want to ask about time cards. I've been definitely wanting to have digital time cards, except for I also work in 481 as a construction buyer, and I'm sure I'm not in the same. I'm not in a unique situation in that many department heads say their best boy, they prepare their department's time cards, so they're not doing just their own, but multiple. And with mine, I have that I do my department, and then additionally, I add a code, a set code to that. So is the software set up at all somehow for someone who prepares their team's time cards as opposed to every person being responsible for their own single one?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I hate to say downside to it is that the crew members are all supposed to sign their own time cards, which we know is the way that things are always supposed to be done, but in a paper world, not necessarily how things are done in practice. So that's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for the crew, that they need to approve their hours in the time card software, even if the best boy, whoever, put it in for them.
Wonderful. I was thinking about it would make sense. I could prepare it, then it probably would go through the person's approval process and then the supervisor's approval, and then it gets all just get emailed in. Amazing.
Yeah.
That's it.
Cool.
Thank you.
And I think that it's something that I didn't touch on that I know has been a topic of conversation, is that I think clearly studios or production companies are going to have to provide some kind of tablet or computer on set for folks that, you know, either don't have access to a computer or the appropriate technology in the moment to take care of their time cards and their AP paperwork. Lots of the AP side I'll speak to does have an app feature, so there will be many aspects of their accounting paperwork that they'll be able to take care of from their smartphone should they have it. But obviously something like a tablet that you can sanitize in between people will likely be necessary on set, although I haven't received a specific yes, we're going to do that from anybody yet, but I think it clearly is going to go that way. Okay.
Right.
Well, there any other questions?
No one else has their hand raised.
Okay. So Jenny, do you want to take over and talk about like conceptually, like how to think about staffing or within accounting specifically, and then maybe touch on remote work?
Okay. So some of the things that the accounting committee has been discussing is how remote work will be handled, as well as what the staffing needs will be once we're returning to work and have to work remotely. I mean, at this point, a lot of the conversations with the studios that we've been talking to have been very positive toward working remotely and not being in an office at all. Or if there becomes a need for us to work in an office, there would be just a one dedicated office away from everyone, kind of like its own little zone set up just for accounting. And no one will be going in and out. There will be no cross-contamination between any departments. So some of the things that we were discussing with regard to accounting staff is due to the needs of, you know, audit and coding and entering transactions, we will need like far more digitally savvy people, which in turn requires a little more like overqualified staff, which also can require overstaffing. But we deem this as a necessity in the beginning just to see what the needs will be before we can reassess in a post-COVID situation. When determining the quantity and the breakdown of the staff, we have to take into account that there's, time for the time that is needed for these crew members to become versed in these systems and processes. So we obviously we're going to see more prep time involved. So to make sure that all of our crew, as well as the accounting department, have all the systems in place and everything's working as seamlessly as possible. With regard to clerks, this has been actually kind of a gray area for us, because during a time when you have to work remotely or have like one person on site or maybe two people potentially on site, which we were sort of discussing maybe a clerk and a second being on site. That way, in the event that there's a shutdown, the accounting department overall will not be as affected by it and can still work. If you have your key, your first, your payroll offsite. So it will create no disruption, but a clerk would probably have to be, have previous experience. We would have to eliminate like the entry level aspect of the position, which it kind of like muddies, the training up of people for a short period of time. But this is only a temporary situation and only a temporary solution to the problem. One of the things we were discussing is, with digital file keeping, they would have to be extremely well versed in and very organized in the digital filing systems and also the digital softwares that the studios will roll out for us to use. Same thing with like payroll staffing. We discussed potentially having, always having an assistant payroll accountant as well as with the payroll accountant, and potentially having a clerk who can work in getting the deals from the UPM and plugging them into the software that's being used, if that software works in that regard, or just being able to wrangle missing or incomplete paperwork by calling, emailing, potentially having maybe Zoom, scheduling some sort of Zoom conferences if people want to talk, or like FaceTime if they want to talk more face-to-face, just to sort of break up the need for people coming in contact with one another. As Megan mentioned, this will also require some pay increases because we're going to need to hire more overqualified staff in the beginning, just to get all the systems moving. We then can reassess and sort of like dial it back as time moves on. Hopefully this is, not going to be the long-term goal with the overstaffing, but I think with regard to the digital aspect and the paperless aspect, I think that should be the goal. And I think we should all, as accountants, be on the same page with regard to, what our staffing needs will be, what programs we require. We will roll out something either online on the 161 website or send out an email with some links to some of the softwares that we've been training with and, given our perspective. But that's pretty much where I'm at with the staffing situation. And let me know if you have any questions.
And I would say that the idea then generally from like a global perspective is when you go back with the intention of being slightly overstaffed and slightly overqualified, right? So instead of having an AP clerk, have an additional second, right? Maybe an additional second that doesn't make the same rate as a more qualified second, but an additional second that's more qualified in the realm of, computers and helping people in that regard, or maintaining those platforms, and being able to learn them quickly will be important. And same as she mentioned on the payroll side. So, an assistant payroll person can help absorb some of the work for the payroll accountant, right? And then in addition to that, the traditional, or I guess non-traditional clerk duties that will still need to be happening. Okay, so I think that runs us through like the different aspects of the accounting, all the risk that we were looking at and assessing for the accountants and our end of things. So I'm happy to pass things off to the production coordinators and hear what they're going to be doing in their workflow.
Hey everybody, Andrew Haynes here. I'm a production coordinator, largely in TV series. I've been part of the coordinator committee since May, and that's when we, in earnest, began conversations regarding COVID. What I'm going to go over is largely our reaction to the initial white paper that came out. And I'm going to try to be quick, but I'm a little monotone and slow, so bear with me. And again, a lot of this is going to be redundant. A lot of what Megan said regarding their thoughts and insights going into the process are the same. For coordinators, I feel like a lot of the things we deal with are symbiotic of each other, so they all affect each other. So a lot of these are going to loop back kind of on each other. Going to start with prep time. With COVID, all safety, paperless concerns, it's like, how do we safely prep an office to begin a job or reconfigure to be for the job we're returning to? With that, we're suggesting we request an additional week of prep. That's going to be to cover floor plans, discussing needs, spacing, safety with the producer, UPM, and the COVID-19 monitor. Along with that, staffing needs, if accounting only has one person each day, things like that are going to change. So does the office need to be what it's traditionally been at that time? And again, redundant, digital tools, we're probably going to have to learn new skill sets, and we're going to have to onboard people. So if there's new software, new programs, we need time to learn them. And then we need to set up a system to make sure the entire crew or whoever needs it can properly be trained on it. Which segues us into production management tools and resources. Most of us are familiar with Synchronize, Doxilla, Protocol, those types of tools. Those are all great. We'll need to rethink how we use them to be most efficient. But there's a lot more stuff out there like Zoom currently, Blue Jeans, Slack, DocuSign. We think we need more access to tools that either the production level or studio level will get behind us so we can share information, communicate, etc. All right, preparing and opening the office. Pretty much day one for any employee that's starting should have the COVID monitor accessible to them. We think on day one, everybody should have training. If you've worked on a Marvel job, you get crazy security training day one. It should be the same for COVID. Such topics during training would be location, distribution, usage of PPE, placement, location of hand sanitizers, cleaning supplies, placement of COVID protocol signage, symptom recognition, training as dictated in the phase 1 document white paper. Additional protocols for kitchens, bathrooms, and common spaces. Those are traditionally spaces that fall onto us to clean. So I think that's a pretty big one. And possibly facility requirements. If you work at KS, you probably recently saw a document with their procedures. We're going to have to incorporate that into our training specific to where you're working and how you're working. Further on Betty Chin's question earlier about contingency plans, there should be a protocol in place in case a crew member, cast member, office staff gets sick. So in addition to replacing them, it's just say they test positive on set on the day. What do you do with that person? There needs to be a plan, a safe space for this person, and everybody should be aware of what this plan is. That should be part of the training. Brand, I hope you're okay with me adding this. A PGA call the other day, they mentioned a code of conduct. This might be something that gets looped in with start work, but it seems like we all signed the code of conduct for New York being like, we're going to be reasonable citizens when on location, things like that. It seems like there might be something similar for COVID. And then Brant, Amanda, Dawn, if any of you want to jump in further points, just feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to keep plowing through.
Well, I just want to say a couple things. These are things that we're recommending as minimums and can and should, go over and apply to your situation, right? Like when we're saying more prep time, right? Because you have to find an office, find facility space, things like that, interact with the COVID monitors. It doesn't necessarily, we're saying at least a week. At least you have to have the people there and some kind of plan going into that space. For people who work on, very big shows that need a lot of space, they're probably going to need more time. And just because we're talking about this now, you should be able to scale up and say that. There is also kind of a thread about onboarding in general, right? Like, and by that, what I mean is when a person comes in and signs their start work, they're going to have to sign a number of documents, right? But they're also going to have to attend a series of meetings. And what we have in indication from the documents that we've seen is that there's going to be some kind of COVID training, right? There should be a plan in place, and we should have a conversation about what that means when and who's doing it really, right? Like, is it an assistant coordinator that has to manage all these documents and make sure that everybody goes through it? Or is it, somebody on the COVID team? Is the COVID team, do they have an assistant coordinator? Because we've seen some evidence of that happening, right? There's some interaction between people. Those are things that are slightly up in the air, but things that we recommend is that we have additional staff to handle those things as they come up, and it's handled by a 161 person. That's all I wanted to say about that so far. Sorry. Yeah.
All right, I'll continue with daily protocols. The white paper and the way forward both detail daily symptom screenings. Who's going to be responsible for that? Indications seem like it's going to be the COVID monitor and their team. But I think this will be a case like most things where the office is involved somewhat. Say you have a stage day with a lot of background, you secure the background holding space. So if we have to have a designated space for people to sign in, go through their symptom screening, that's probably going to fall on us. This is kind of a big one. And even outside of COVID, this is kind of a thought, limiting personnel and visitors to the office. Offices shouldn't have unauthorized guests. Like certain other departments that might be more typical of seeing in the kitchen, for instance, like that can't really happen in the time of COVID. The office should be for office staff. There's talk of limiting to one entrance. Similar to that would be like if you've worked in the restaurant entrance or industry, normally for the kitchen, there's an entrance and an exit. So depending on safety concerns, similar, that's something to explore for future offices. And then considering a door attendant. So I know a lot of offices I've been in, we try to have the secretary, somebody that's generally always at their desk towards the front. And this could be a secretary, PA, just somebody that's making sure people should be in the office, why they're there, to stop any, like errant people coming in. And then if there are visitors, if your showrunner, producers have somebody that needs to come in, we have to make sure that they're abiding by the same COVID policies that everybody else is. Distro and procurement. One thing we're suggesting is to have a designated landing spot for packages. This, again, is going to vary facility to facility. If you're at Steiner, they already have their mailroom, so that might work itself out. If you're at early stages, you might have to find space yourself. And the thoughts are, if you have a designated landing zone, all your packages can be logged and disinfected. Something we're gonna have to relate to crew, namely props, art department, those types, is they're gonna have to have their orders, in earlier. Because if we have a waiting period for items to be disinfected, if you have that hero prop that's arriving at 8:30 in the morning, like you might not get it. It's just a thing. Paperless. Like I feel like accounting hit most of the things here. For us, like one of the bread and butter aspects of the office is distributing paper, scripts, schedules, what have you. This kind of goes back to digital tools and onboarding. We're going to need producers, studios, everybody behind us to make sure everybody realizes you might not get a script. Or if you do get a script, maybe you can print it out yourself, which would be us possibly purchasing more equipment for people so they can do such things, or encouraging people to use like iPad software to digitally take notes on their scripts. There really shouldn't be any limitations to what can be paperless. Anything that you get should, in 2020, be fine digital. That's the general thought. And with lists, I think digital management tools and resources is something we can further look in committee. If people have suggestions of software they really like that they use, we should compile lists and have that available to our membership. Work day, limiting it to 10 hours. That's not only for the crew, that should be for the office. Mental well-being, turnaround times, like a big concern. I'm going to use like mental wellness going to the next one, which is food and beverages. This is something that keeps me up at night when it really shouldn't. But food's not going to be the same. Who knows when it will be. Some thoughts and suggestions for the office and other remote spaces that we have would be to have a food truck or catering service for them. This would be treated the same as the crew, breakfast and lunch, probably with an option for dinner if you have to work late. Craft service should all be single serving. Can't have communal food, can't have bagel tray, can't have like Fatty Friday trays, sorry. We're gonna have to limit the number of people that go into the kitchen. How you do that, because I'm sure everybody's been, early call, just trying to grab their cup of coffee, and then somebody starts pestering with you questions and you're just like, back off me. A lot of kitchens I've worked in have been enclosed and tight. So we're really gonna have to police like one person at a time, two people at a time. Leftover food in the fridges, like, there's just so many things that can't happen anymore, and it's gonna fall on us. Kitchen in particular, since it is like a sensitive space, face mask for sure. If you're going to the kitchen, you should have a face mask on. Regardless in the office, if you feel unsafe or if you're within 6 feet of somebody, you should be wearing a mask. If possible and available, we should encourage touchless water filtration systems. People, just touching. I mean, I normally have my beard, so I go like this a lot. So if I'm getting water going like this, it's bad news. Production staff can no longer be dishwashers. I'm sure everybody's had any number of departments where somebody has their own special mug. Do they clean their own special mug? No. Just at the end of the day, it ends up in the sink and somehow it magically gets cleaned at night. We shouldn't be putting our staff at risk cleaning other people's dishware, if you have your mug, your bottle, that's great. Take care of it yourself. Common spaces and their cleaning. Naturally, all cleaning, all all offices should be cleaned on a daily basis at this point. For the production office and other remote spaces, bathrooms and kitchens should probably be cleaned throughout the day. It's gonna require hiring additional cleaning staff or talking with your facility like Kaufman, Steiner, about what their policies are and how often they're gonna be cleaning. While we're encouraging everybody to go paperless, we're still gonna have copiers, printers, laminators, what have you. We're gonna have to set up systems to ensure that they're wiped down after each use by the user, and then have hand sanitizer close by so they can immediately clean their hands. And we're just gonna have to encourage and Pavlov dogs this to everybody. Additional equipment should be acquired as needed. I know I've been big on trying to get a dedicated copier for accounting, which may no longer be needed, but there's so much printing, scanning amongst other departments that more equipment that sometimes they're like, oh, do we want to spend $500? Like now it seems like it's worth it. So additional equipment for costumes, art, whoever. Going to touch on travel. This one also gives me nightmares, and it seems like it's changing still with COVID on the rise throughout most of the country. So bringing people into New York or LA or other areas will be even more difficult. But number one is we need to minimize travel, not really on us, but the thought is production should be striving to hire local. If a job's traveling a large portion of cast or crew, charters should be thought of opposed to public travel. If traveling to a distant location, medical personnel is going to need to be found beforehand. So when people land, we safely have somebody to send them to in case anybody shows symptoms. And that also plays into some of the way forwards suggested protocols. We should restrict non-essential personnel. Having a producer or cast member ask to split their ticket probably shouldn't happen going forward during the time of COVID. We shouldn't be responsible for another person's safety traveling is the general thought there. Long-term housing considerations. New York's changed a lot, even since I've been a coordinator. So many people try to go to Airbnb just because it's cheaper or whatever. We should really encourage long-term rentals, the AKAs, the furnished quarters, places of similar ilk, assumingly will have detailed cleaning policies in place that we can check, audit, make sure they're up to snuff. We're gonna have to keep up to date on regional outbreaks and restrictions. Easy for us in New York right now because our state just mandated that, 8 states have to go into quarantine when they come here, which also affects pre-planning by the producers, ADs, everybody when bringing in cast members or crew members from certain places. All housing options, like I think we're gonna have to vet their cleaning procedures. I don't know if that's gonna be done at a show level or if that's gonna be something where we're gonna have to submit it to the COVID monitor studio, but regardless, I think if we're putting somebody up somewhere, we need to know that they're gonna be safe. Air travel should only be booked by airlines that are complying with CDC guidelines. So wearing masks, things like that. And then 2 kind of points that maybe Bran or Amanda or Dawn can catch up in more detail later, but encouraging travel coordinators to maybe work from home. They're not necessarily needed in the office, even though a lot of times it's helpful to talk to people. This is a job that can largely be done via phone calls and email. And then hiring additional staff. If there is more research, more safety concerns, they're gonna need a travel coordinator, or if the coordinator is doing it themselves, they're gonna need backup to help filter all this information and travel people safely. Some things that we kind of left TBD because they still seem really up in the air and they're kind of depending on any agreements that come in place. Compliance, like everything else, we're probably going to have to do some sort of reports as part of a wrap. So TBD. Insurance and risk management, we don't know at this point. Jenny Gates commented on some of it. TBD, and that's largely going to be based on the studio and what policies they have in with their brokers and bond companies. Another thing that came out of the PGA call is in March, one of the major bond companies had like over 300 claims by like the end of March. So, you know, things will be different there. Wrap, I think, kind of mirrors prep. Like we'll probably need more wrap time and encouraging paperless, no more paper wrap binders. If anybody still does that, everything should be digital at this point. And then it's going to end with staffing, which somebody else want to comment on?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the way that I would put this is that here's what we know so far is that there have been different interpretations of what the COVID group of people are going to be. At the minimum, we know that there's a COVID supervisor and a COVID manager, something like that, right? What we've seen happen in reality, either by rumor or, you know, there's some production manuals or something that are circulating around that it's a much larger team. And that makes sense because there's, you know, one example I heard was that there would be a 16-person department that handles all things COVID on a feature, right? I've heard similar things where, you know, you have some location people, some management. The thing that I want to express is that if we're being asked to do those kind of things, you need additional help, right? You need an additional coordinator or additional assistant coordinator or something, depending upon the scale of the job. And nobody should feel like they are, you know, doing extra work just because of the COVID situation. Some people might, you know, producer might counter that and say, well, you got all this extra time, you got all these things and everything, but that's not going to really do anything when it comes down to production, when you're actually shooting, because your time is going to be wrapped up doing those things. So we don't really have a way to linearly address additional staffing concerns because we don't have a plan of what the COVID team looks like. But we do have this general idea that it might be bigger than what we think it is. And if that's the case, people should ask for more staff. And the other thing I want to say about that is that and Don, you can correct me if I'm right, I don't think coordinators should have the sole responsibility of having you know, some kind of COVID management or correcting an office without the guise of a COVID manager or somebody who is in that role of a health and safety person. We have enough responsibilities on our plate. And we have only gained more in this situation. We are in fact going to have more responsibility. But the idea that we're going to like go in and know how an office should be moved or moved around to accommodate for this reality doesn't seem like a good idea for us. Yeah, so that's what I want to say about that.
At the risk of speaking out of turn because the negotiations haven't finished, I would kind of anticipate that the COVID team could be anywhere from 2 or more people. If it's 2 people, we're going to need significantly more staff in the office. Either way, accounting is going to need significantly more staff, or more trained staff. But as far as coordinators and the production office itself, yes, we're going to have to find out exactly what the COVID team consists of and how the division of labor is going to be. But in addition to whatever compliance and whatever paperwork that's going to be required or additional work required that are specific to COVID, you know darn well there's going to be the PPE and the sanitizing and such will probably fall on the coordinators and the coordinators team. In addition to that, it's all the additional equipment that's going to be required or expendables that are going to be required from each department. So keep that in mind. Your job, even if you aren't handling just COVID paperwork or helping with the COVID team, your job's going to get bigger because there's going to need to be hair and makeup. We order everything for hair and makeup. They're going to need 3 times what they need because now they cannot clean brushes and use it on another actor. So everything, there's just going to be more constant ordering. Keep that in mind when you're requiring staff. That you're just going to have, your current team is not going to be able to keep up with that volume.
And then the other kind of topic that's a corollary of this is the idea of remote work for people that are coordinators and assistant coordinators and travel coordinators. Having done the job for a long time, I will say that every coordinator works a little differently, and with respect to your individual work styles and everything, there's that. But if you can find, and this is just an open question, I'm very happy to receive feedback on it. If you can find ways to manage a staff where you have offsite people, that would be to our benefit. You know, there's a lot of travel coordinators who work remote. Seems like a natural thing to do. Frankly, I don't exactly know how to move the assistant coordinator totally offsite, but this is kind of what I was saying in the beginning, is that you could see a world where there is in fact, you know, if everything moves digitally, the necessity of, and there's less people in the office, there is, you know, an idea where you could maybe do that job remotely, or at least part remotely, or a staggered schedule or something like that. So, you know, that's a discussion point that we can have further conversations, because we're still in negotiation with everything. It's still kind of up in the air, but at the end of the day, like, the perfect thing that would happen is that we identify a best practice, and that's what people do down the road. Yeah. I think that's all I had to say at that point, but do we want to take any questions?
No one has their hand raised.
I'll go to V in the chat asking about people with allergies and having catered food. I think it's in the way forward they detail possibly like taking orders in advance. So it'd still be like custom orders via catering. So it's not going to be like you go up to the truck and you're like, I want this sandwich. It's going to be either that morning or the night before via an app or email. You're going to put in your order. So any allergy concerns, you know, that goes back to safety first for everybody. And that's how that would be, you know, addressed.
Can I say something about the working from home aspect? Yeah. So clearly, if we're working from home, whether full-time or part-time, you're going to need a full office set up at home. You're going to need a possibly another office set up in the office itself. We need to be thinking about also making sure that our people have access to all that they need when they're working from home. And let's talk about kits and the non-capping of kits. And again, I can't, you know, if I have to set up an office at home and I have to set an office in 2 places, we need to talk about, you know, and it's not something they're going to fight during this for us specifically, I don't think, but the capping of kits I find to be a big, huge problem when we're going to be required to have a lot more stuff than we normally do.
Yeah, for sure.
And maybe that's a note we can take from our script supervisor friends on how they negotiate their kits. Just a thought more than anything.
Yeah. We have a question from Amanda Japes.
Amanda.
Amanda.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Thanks. I just wanted to, maybe this is me just chiming in on my own 2 cents, but regarding Andrew's kitchen nightmares, I mean, accounting, honestly, I've seen in a lot of offices will usually have their own, oh good, my dad is calling. Oh Jesus, excuse me. Sorry. will usually have their own fridge, and it's usually like tiny, and obviously because accounting can, you know, reimburse their own receipts and take care of themselves, they're usually, you know, handled that way. So I understand obviously in prep, the kitchen can get to be, you know, everybody's involved because everybody's around, but there is that option that I just wanted to put out there, that that could be deemed like a normal thing that occurs, where there's another coffee pot as well. It's not everybody shuffling into the same space and making production crazy. So I just wanted to chime in on that one. But it sounds like since everything is going to be super remote anyway, that'll be its own thing. That's all. It wasn't really a question. Sorry.
No, that's
Okay,
great.
To your point though, it's like at on my current or my old jobs, like we had different setups for people, but yet in the morning people still want to come into the office and get coffee. And it's like, but you have a K-cup machine over there. Like, you know, so yeah, it's going to be a cultural shift of the water cooler conversations. Just, you know, you'll have to have them on your phone or via quick Instagram or face, you know, time chat or something. So
or just 10-hour Zooms all day.
All day. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I do have to jump off, but thank you for all of this. This is wonderful.
No problem.
Hi, this is Veronica Lupus, script supervisor. It's not really related, but I'm an old-timer paper script supervisor, and I understand and totally agree that you have to go digital as much as you can. Now, I was just wondering, since the coordinator are getting the availability list and so, are the paper script supervisor gonna be at the bottom of the list? Even though now we've been scanning and sending them all, I'm just saying, asking. I hope you are not doing that.
I'm not sure what you mean by hope we're not doing that, Veronica.
I meant.
I think everyone should go paperless, so the scanning should work even for those who are still using paper scripts.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. Like, I hope if we are not like scripty, all those electronic script supervisors.
There's no way we would require that. Absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Just
you.
as long as you can scan your stuff, that's great.
Exactly. That's what we've been doing. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Do we have any other questions? So I just want to say the one thing about this is that we're going to work on some kind of way that we can provide feedback to one another and say what we're doing, you know, hopefully in some kind of real-time situation. But for now, if you have any questions about how other people are doing things, feel free to email the coordinator email that was on the invite to this. We'll probably send out another blast to say, you know, to email this way in case there's anything that you have questions on.
They can also email the accountants directly. I think it's accountants at local161.org if they want to have
great.
that more specific.
Brant, there's two questions in the chat. Do we want to address those real quick before we end?
Sure.
Crystal Pepe for the accounts is asking regarding the accounting clerk position, if entry-level accountants won't be hired at this time.
I actually did answer her privately, but I will also answer everybody. At the moment, we think just due to the needs of the accounting department workflow, depending on whether we're remote or partially on site, we believe that a clerk who has either prior production experience or has clerked before would probably be a better option, as we're going to need someone very organized and very familiar with our accounting systems and some of the digital onboarding that will be required. I mean, this is just a temporary solution. It's not something that we anticipate going on for good, because we really do want to train people up and keep training people up. One of the things that the accountants committee has been discussing is, and working with the education committee, training seminars for clerks, for firsts, you know, for keys, like just ways to be able to bump up. So that's something we may be able to consider once we have a grasp of the workflow, once we do return to work. I don't know if maybe Megan wants to also chime in.
Well, I just want to say it's less of a, first of all, there's no like, you can't hire a clerk, don't hire, nobody's saying that. You know, you have to assess your own show and what your needs are, you know, what your strengths are and your team's strengths. And you're, as always, you're just trying to fill in the blanks. The main point here is that there's a new skill set that will be required. So it makes sense when you're thinking about that clerk. We've all worked with clerks that are really good printing out the labels, keeping on top of the paper, doing that physical, you know, moving things around. And when I think of that category of person that I've honestly loved working with, there are very few that also possess the skills to learn new digital platforms quickly, to be able to organize digital files in the same efficient and effective manner that they did here. That doesn't mean it's not possible. That means that since we're all kind of going back in a little blind as to what it is that we're doing, that the recommendation is look for people who have a skill set or a talent for learning digital things quickly, for managing digital paper trails and things like that, because it's not necessarily the same person that you would have hired before. But there's nobody's saying don't do anything. These are just, hey, we're thinking ahead to what you're going to need when you go back, and we want to make sure that you are also, okay, you know, that's also something that you're going to have to anticipate, that you're going to need that completely different skill set than what we would have hired for in the past. That's all.
Philip Ramos has a question about some production starting up at the end of the July. I don't exactly know what's starting up, but if anybody has any indication, let me know, or we can talk about it now, because that's helpful to know, you know.
I heard Secession's planning on filming like by like Labor Day-ish. So that'd be
cool.
Around then for prep and then shooting.
Yeah.
Also, in Atlanta, hi, I'm Amy, a script supervisor in Atlanta.
Hey.
And I was told we would start, I'm doing a Marvel streaming series. And I was told that Disney already has hired
Accountants?
Pardon me?
Is it Jersey? They hired accountants, right?
It's not Jersey. We were actually it's architect.
Oh yes. Okay.
We were shooting in March 13th. We stopped production. So I was told that Disney hired like 8 COVID people, and we're supposed to start shooting August 3rd. They're going to be in prep like the last 2 weeks of July, they say, if things go as they want.
This is why it is so important for people to report their work, so we know where people are being required to work, and we can make sure everyone's safe.
Yeah. So, well, I was given a phone call. It's not official.
No, I know it. I'm just driving the point home. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. The medic that I know that got hired was supposed to start today at Pinewood, making the stages safe and stuff. But I don't know if that for sure will happen, you know, mid-July prep, shoot August 3rd or not yet.
Yep, for sure.
I want to talk to you about that, because I think that's something that you have to talk to the union and find out. They can investigate more and help you out about safety measures and stuff like that, what's going on. Because as a script supervisor, like someone said before, report your work. That's why we have reporting your work, is so make sure that the union know that you're working for a company, and therefore they can help you and support you if anything happens. So that's my suggestion, to do that. That way, you know, our union, like our business agents can help you with that information and everything. But I wish you the best though, if it does come through though.
Well, thank you. I do call in when I get work. It's just not official. You know, we abruptly ended.
Right, right.
I was on the show, it abruptly ended. And as soon as it's official, I will say, hey, you know, this is what's up.
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting because how everybody's talking, it's like Disney just has their own, it seems like they have their own COVID thing happening. And if everything has been approved and signed off, it feels strange.
Well, I think that, you know, some studios are erring on the side of caution because they want to shoot. And they probably are hiring more people than they'll finally been able to really, than they'll actually need by contract. And that's important that they're erring on that. But I don't know how that's, none of us know how that's going to come out. But if they're hiring people and they're saying this is what our COVID team is, at least it's a sign in the right direction. I would say that probably everybody who, if you start a show and they don't have a COVID plan in place and they expect you to do it, that's a show you should walk away from. I mean, that's my personal feeling about that. But
well, and there are lots of different entities in place too, and all of these entities should be responsibly moving forward with their own ideas about how to keep people safe with COVID. So of course the studios, you know, Disney's doing this, of course they are, but that's separate from the state and the federal government and the individual cities if you live in a major city, and the unions. Like, it's all kind of, all of these entities are all moving the balls forward at the same time, and at some point things are going to start to coalesce and make sense together, but really all the dots haven't been connected. So, you know, as somebody mentioned earlier, I'm being asked to do something, but we're not in phase 4 yet. You know, obviously the right hand's not talking to the left, and that's where the union can help. When you report that you're being asked to do something that the entities in charge of these different projects are not connected well enough to be able to protect your safety. So it's not a surprise, and it shouldn't be alarming to hear when studios are saying, here's what our COVID plan is, and the state says, here's where we are with our COVID safety, and those two don't match. I would say this is the opportunity to rely on the union to help make sure that you're protected in the gap in between these entities sometimes.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm actually here. I've been here the whole time. I just want to say really quickly that, you know, from the people I've talked to in the past and from my understanding of things, Local 161 isn't in the position of keeping people from working. Like, that's not really what we do. It's more about keeping people safe. So, you know, if you're being offered a job and at any point in time you're like, oh, what if I call the union and I'm not going to be able to take the job because they're going to tell me I can't, that's not really how things work. It's really a lot more about just making sure that you're being safe, and that when you're reporting your work, what you're doing is you're making sure that Jennifer and Colleen are there to cover you, not the other way around. I feel like that's an important distinction that needs to be made, so that people are aware that, you're never, nobody's ever going to do anything to keep you from being able to do your job. We're just going to make sure that you're being taken care of. Anyway, back to work.
One additional thought is these are largely the bare minimums we're talking about. A lot of studios and hopefully big ones like Disney are going to go above and beyond all these recommendations to really make sure people are safe.
Linda.
I see we have some questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, Linda has her hand raised.
Hi, hi, it's Linda. I'm sitting here. I listened this morning before I joined the seminar to the EP seminar, which I recommend a lot of you go and listen to and watch. They recorded it. They're doing a whole bunch of seminars, and these were all people who were producers who were actually telling what they were doing. The gentleman, I think it was Darren Ayers from EP was talking about everyone's starting to use smart paperwork, start times, time cards. They even got smart POs, so the accountants wouldn't be using so much paperwork. They also talked about every production office having someone come in to figure out how they can lay it out. There probably won't be any 2-people offices. They also talked about having a PPE manager so that coordinators would not be doing this. Someone would be in charge of, passing out the PPE, doing the tests, looking at all that stuff. They also talked about tent pods. So they would hire background for a whole week and keep them on call so that they wouldn't be going to other shows. And then people, all the different, people would be staying in places, ordering your food the night before, and everything being delivered breakfast and lunch in boxes. They also talked about trying to produce simpler scripts so that they wouldn't have to go and have really much longer days or being able to produce everything. And they'd also talked about having more vans and not being able to put everyone in the van at the same time. And that's just some of the stuff I jotted down. But it was interesting because we're talking about stuff, and then listen, and the guys there was somebody from Warner Brothers, there was a guy from NBC, these producers, and so they're like talking about this stuff at a level that we're not, they're like our bosses. So it would be, it's interesting to hear what they were doing. But so I just wanted to let you guys know about that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. We'll work on sending out a recap email to this, and hopefully if we can get the video to that, we'll send a link to that too. I know that was happening at the same time, but I know we're both recording our things here, so they're both, you can watch both.
Alexander Hill has a question.
Alexander Hill.
Yeah.
Yes, hi, Alex here. Yeah, I had a quick question about the health safety officer or supervisor. Would somebody from their department, would they possibly be the shop steward on set? It just seems, since they can't be overruled on any concerns regarding health or safety, that maybe that would be a good fit. I didn't know if there was anything that would preclude them from doing that or not.
I think until we know where that person comes from, whether it's an IA member, a DGA member, an independent,
Okay.
that
Good point, because it's not set yet. I know that's what was being pushed forward.
It already has enough. It can't be the current shop steward because that person already has a job and is a shop steward.
Yeah. I also feel that, just to butt in here, is that you might have some conflicts of interest with that, where the person could use their ability as a shop steward for COVID related things that aren't necessarily effective for, in other words, you could say, I don't know, what's a common issue? We could talk about, like, we're conflating different issues when we talk to the same shop steward, right? There should be different people, probably. If you talk about breaking for lunch on time, suddenly you're talking to the same person you talked about COVID stuff. That angle of it doesn't make that much sense to me, but other people may disagree.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just coming at it from the perspective that I know that they get pushback from productions a lot of time, that if you were in that position, that you wouldn't have to worry about being fired if you were essentially infallible, but maybe that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, for sure. Hey everybody, Alex Hill is the chair of the script supervisor committee.
Yes, hi.
In case anybody doesn't know him, he's a great guy.
Josh Mankoff has a question.
Yes, kind of piggybacking off Alex's question, given that the COVID officer is kind of like a health and safety department, has there been any discussion that they would take over things like, injury and accident reports? Does those kind of go hand in hand, just spitballing?
That's a really interesting question. I would want to not give up a position in the office if it involved that, right? But we don't know what's going to happen with insurance and COVID and all of this stuff. So, for instance, like, I don't know what happens if you have a COVID insurance claim, if that could be a thing in the future. And I don't know if whoever's doing the paperwork for that is on the COVID team or if it's on the production staff. what I would probably want to think is that if it's truly going to be like an 8 or something person department, there's an additional assistant coordinator who does things that are solely COVID related. But we don't know so far yet because it's up for negotiation. I mean, kind of makes sense, but I wouldn't want it to be to the detriment of 161 members, you know? Sorry, did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I was just, I'd heard people say like it would be a health and safety department. So just curious if there was any discussion in that regard.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that maybe that needs fine tuning as we get into it a little bit more. Andrew, did you want to say something?
Yeah, kind of related to the position, and maybe Dawn or Amanda can like chime in on this, but assuming that it's at least 2 people, isn't the thought like the head person isn't necessarily the union member or somebody like that person could be studio hired, kind of like the safety rep that we all deal with. And then the manager below them, that's more like the person that interacts with the crew, like on a more structural level, or am I misreading that?
You're assuming that, I think. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily been assumed that way. And
Okay.
it's still being worked out in these negotiations. And it will probably take some time to come to a conclusion of what the studios require and what we require.
All right, I think maybe we could do a last call for questions if anybody has any. I mean, we say last call, but this isn't going to be the end of it. We'll send out an email and say to give out email addresses in case you have any other questions. And I don't know, I think we'll probably do something similar to this in the future, depending upon how the negotiations go and how it affects us, because we probably have to talk about the material consequences of that negotiation. So any other questions for the town hall? All right. Well, accounting committee, do you have any other closing remarks you want to say? All right. No, all right, good.
Megan,
well,
Megan, you're muted if you were talking to.
Thank you. I was just saying, as Brant mentioned, you know, this is going to continue to be, this has been up to this point a very informed and thorough conversation. And at this point in time, you know, we're really just wanting to bring in the rest of the membership. So if you have further concerns or thoughts that occur to you, you know, accounting related specifically, please send us an email, accountants@local161.org. Evolving, and membership is, you know, the safety of the membership is what we're moving towards. So the accountants committee meets regularly. We're going to continue talking about this. There is a COVID subcommittee, the production committee, you know, coordinator committees talking about this, scripties, everybody's involved. So you should know that in the background, all of this is always happening, and you're free to participate in the conversation or to share any kind of concern. And, you know, I'm always happy to give feedback as to, even if the answer is, we don't know anything new yet, you know, at least you would know that and know where we were kind of at in the process. But you're welcome to that information anytime you like.
Yeah, the same thing with the coordinators. And the one thing I want to say is, you know, I think we're really pleased with the job that Dawn and the business agents have done in being super involved in the conversation. The one thing I can say is that as we go through this process, 161 is not out of the loop. They know everything that's going on. They're in the negotiations. Colleen's in it right now, right, Don? I think that's what's happening. So at least, you know, we're there. We're not going to find out something as a consequence and then have to deal with it after the fact. We're talking about it now. So when we do go back to work, we can have systems in place and work that out. So thank you all. And thanks to everybody for coming. And well, hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Thank you guys for putting this together. Well done.
Thank you. All right.
This was really informative. Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm out.